Yeah, I wanted to talk with you sometime about consequences in this game. I don't know if you want to do that now or if you would
Well, it matters.
like
You
to
can
say that
see it's
room later.
integrated, right? I mean, you can see
Yeah,
how it's integrated, that the nature of the risk in question at the fine grain that we're talking about is going to play very deeply into these issues.
yeah,
One of the things that I kind of like about dogs is that even though the fallout from a talking contest is not potentially fatal like it is for a guns contest,
right.
but its content can still be very, very brutal. Even if it is just one or two D4, the description of it can be so nasty that the person would much rather have taken a bullet wound. And so that's sort of one of my pleasures in playing dogs, is particularly with talking contests. People might say, listen, we're just going to talk everybody down. We're not savages. We're not going to shoot everybody. Well, a few lost contests along the way, and they're going to really start feeling like shooting people. So it's that's kind of the thing I want to talk about too, is the nature of the consequence. I was talking about cyberpunk in particular in terms of tissue trauma, because that's a
Right.
really, really easy thing to focus on whenever we're talking about this stuff.
Yeah,
But what we're really talking about is consequences to the character in play going forward. That's what we're talking about. Tissue trauma
gotcha,
being one such thing, and that's all.
gotcha.
So that's kind of all I really wanted. But let's take it to the fiction. Let's take it to the fiction of I got it. The wolves of the sacred grove have been fitted with battery packs on the back of their heads
Hmm.
and are driven into a frenzy by the guy with the remote.
Hmm.
And you guys are going to come and try to maybe monkey wrench the factory, or you're going to try to come and induce the brownies to strike at the factory, or who knows what. I mean, I'm being maybe a little silly in my descriptions, but so no, who know? I don't know quite what the tone is that we're shooting for here, but let's
Right.
make it appropriate for the tone. And whatever the tone was going in, it's certainly going to change when the beautiful sacred wolves, of which we have been proud of in previous play, show up with these goddamn mind control, tormented, you know, about to kill us
Right.
kind of approach. So here we are. We're being attacked by the, this cybernetically augmented and traumatized and, enraged wolves. So we're going to fight them now. All right. Tell me a little bit about the kind of damage. Never mind the curse for the moment. Tell me about
Right.
the kind of damage you envision player characters potentially sustaining
Right.
during and because of such an event.
Right. So, for one reason or another, I've never been particularly interested in this game in like the in the tissue trauma of the fairies. It's always been to me about like the ultimate questions. So originally there were four levels of consequence, and if you could choose to raise the stakes in a conflict to potentially take the next level. So there was like embarrassment, loss, injury, and incapacitation, and you could, you would name the stakes in the beginning. So if the stakes were embarrassment, you were in an argument with a she prince. So in this case, it would probably be injury.
Right.
But
Yeah, we're
then you
starting
could,
with injury at the very least.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So if you were fighting, you could raise the stakes in a way to um, potentially go from injury to incapacitation. But the actual like hit points were really important to me, and actually describing
Yeah, you don't
the
necessarily need hit points for the kind of back and forth
yeah,
that I'm talking about, but again, you're talking a little mechanically. I said
Yeah.
fictionally.
Yeah.
There we are. We had to kill some of the wolves. And I
Right.
would like to say that for however the mechanics permitted it, some of us did our best to try to, you know, free them of this
Right.
durance. Um, so therefore, we have triumphed in that we are no longer about to be killed by them. Perhaps one or two of them is freed, or at least has been the influence of the guy with the remote has been broken, perhaps in some fashion. But
Right.
we had to kill a few of them on the way, and we did not like that, my friend. We did
Right.
not like that one bit. Are some of us bitten and ripped up? I'm going to venture to say that if some of us aren't, then the game wasn't doing its job.
Hmm.
You can't say, okay, well, you succeeded, so everything's fine. Everybody, whatever injuries you took, you're fine. I mean, that kind of devalues the tragedy of the wolves, right? In a
Right.
lot of ways, I would hate to go through that fight with nobody wounded. I'd be pissed, aesthetically speaking.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say, phew, lucky. We've got more points to go into the next encounter with. I'd be like, man, we should have paid a
Yeah.
price. We should have suffered. You
Yeah.
know, those we wouldn't if they hadn't hurt us, and we knew the torment in their minds as they were disoriented and raged and didn't understand that they were fighting their friends or whatever. Um, but they, but the fact that they bit us under those circumstances validates the nature of the fight to an extent that for it not to be mechanically important in some way is extremely disappointing.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's.
so those are just some things I'd like you to consider about that.
Yeah.
You can have the emotional version of it too. Do we take emotional scars when a character takes effects that are going to be lasting psychologically or otherwise something painful to them? This would certainly rate for taking that kind of damage too.
Right.
So therefore, we have to think a little bit about whether this is a game where you choose the damage you've taken
Hmm.
or whether damage is imposed and you did what you could along the way to minimize it, but that's the way the cookie crumbled this time.
Right. Yeah. The
Um,
reason that I went mechanical with it right away was that ultimately it seemed to me that injuries were only so interesting as they could be made to make you pay, whereas the narrator could make you pay for it later, and so that's why I kind of was edging towards having consequences give the narrator points, and then you would narrate. As you narrated, things would happen to the characters, and then later on, with the points that the narrator had gotten, they could say, "Oh, you remember how the wolf bit into your thigh? Well, I'm going to pay these points. You stumble and fall, and like somehow that affects you mechanically."
I would suggest that they be made unabstract. You
Okay.
got those points when the wolf bit your thigh. If you had a silhouette on your character sheet, you would put a circle on your thigh and write wolf bite right there.
Hmm.
And then the narrator can invoke it later. But it is what it is. It's not as though the narrator says, oh, yeah, the wolf bit you. I got to remember, right, all the little things that happened and invoke them ad lib as I go along. I don't find that as compelling. Or, frankly, I find it kind of laborious. So, does that.
Okay.
And I think that doing what I just said would actually be fairly vivid. I mean, the reality of what happened along the way in the fight
Yeah.
being manifest on the sheet in some fashion like that is a very strong feature. I don't recommend it for all role playing games. One of the most important things about Champions is that stun clears.
Right.
So, tracking your stun is important, but it's not like being stunned in the previous fight has any role in this fight. That stuff clears.
Right.
So therefore, I would not, for example, want on a silhouette of a champion's character to have to write, okay, took, sandblaster sandblasted me right here. That's
Right.
my wound, right? That's not really all that important in champions. Whereas in a game like what you're describing, where you don't have points that you're tracking, but you do have consequences of the kind you just described, if you want to keep that, then actually stating the outcome, coloring it up by writing it on there on the sheet, what it is and how you got it. I mean, not a
Right.
paragraph, right? Just wolf bite next to the thigh is fine.
Right.
And then, the the narrator can look around on everybody's sheet and say, oh, right, well, you're chasing some dude through the brambles at night, Mr. Wolf bite on a thigh. I think it's about time for that to hurt.
Right.
And I
Okay.
don't think you would ever get anybody objecting about that. They're primed to enjoy it.
Right.
Whereas
Okay.
if you have kind of this abstract point thing, then you get into sort of a how do I screw the players mode, which immediately, in many cases, shifts into, well, I'll cut him a break mode.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. That's
people
what.
get real wussy about that stuff, me included.
Yeah.
So
Okay. I'll think about that.
yeah. So do you see how this is tricky? Because we have to talk about announcement of actions, we have to talk about resolution of actions, we have to talk about mechanical impact of actions, we have to talk about talking about it throughout,
Yeah.
and it's not neutral. It's not. There is quite a bit of design space, but it is not an infinite design space. There are empty spots in it where you don't want to go,
Right.
and many of the empty spots are statistical. I've only alluded to that a couple of times in these conversations. But many of them are also in terms of what kind of content goes where and when it's fun and when it's not.
Okay.
So whether anybody comes up with a massive, diagram about this, notice that we haven't talked about the scale of conflict because I just took it as read of what scale do you want the whole contest to be about. I just took that as given. Didn't talk about the options of making it bigger or smaller or anything like that.
Right.
Do you, there we would be talking. I mean, I alluded to it in that I pointed out a game which would be, by any stretch of the imagination, as old school as you could get, and you'll notice that it has this massive abstract resolution system,
Right.
counter to certain claims about what old school is supposed to mean.
Right.
But you also have, as I say, these issues of scale. You also have issues of consequences at the whole situation level. And that I think you've thought about because you're interested in whether all of the encounters during this session for this session are basically going to be a loss for the realm or not.
Right.
So that's why I didn't really want to drill into anything at the macro scale. You seem to have that under control. And I didn't really want to talk about the scale of the conflict itself in terms of resolutions because you'd already stated that you wanted there to be basically one roll, more or less, with manipulations inside it of some kind.
Right.
So I just took those as read. Obviously, the room for options on both of those levels is vast.
So they give me a lot to think about.
Yeah. Well, this is cool. We haven't even talked about IIEE yet.
About what? I'm sorry.
Intent, initiation, execution, effect. And we will probably reserve that. That's a whole session in and of itself, I would say.
Yeah, I have read that. I read
yeah.
about it before.
But working your way through it with multiple game systems as comparisons can be illuminating. So I would say that might be where we go. But never forgetting that everything we're talking about, as I tried to beat into the ground last session, is a subset of the color reward cycle. And the nature of reward is aesthetically inspiration and mechanically change. So before we get a little too abstract about the difference between a short sword and a wolf's bite, before we get intent about that, we have to remember whether that matters in terms of the ultimate mechanics about how characters and situations change.
Right.
So this is all embedded in those principles I've talked about already. Go into the seminar section and look at the diagrams discussions. One is conversations with Jason D'Angelo, and others are just me presenting. There's one that I do by myself, which is a breakdown of Primetime Adventures. There's another one that talks about several games, but it really shows how you do those system diagrams that I like so much. And that's actually probably a really important thing to talk about as well. So that's 2 topics, each one worth a session. System diagrams, IIEE.
So, cool.
All right. Talk to you later.
Yeah.
I guess. And
see you next week.
Yeah. Take care.